Hello everyone, welcome back to life on the hulls, or should I say mould. I think I'm back on the mould again. Very exciting times. This week I'm going to smash out that large dinette module. I'm going to put the first 3 layers on there before putting the foam on. I'm going to gel coat it up, and last week I actually spent all that time preparing that mould, getting it ready for this process. The competition last week in fact was won by Dan Muir. I did in fact go to school with Dan. I found out last night he was one of my dad's apprentices when my father was an apprentice master at the weapons factory, at the small arms factory in Lithgow up in the Blue Mountains. And it was so good to hear from Danny. And he actually commented and back on the video and said that it must have been my dad's engineering skills that helped him guess the weight of the hull. Very, very happy to hear that. Got a little bit emotional, almost had a tear in my eye. It was lovely. But for now, we've got a big week coming up, and let's get into it. For now, I'm waiting on a gel coat. Not happy at all. No sooner had I set it and my resins arrived, so I'm ready to go. I've already given the mold a good wax off with the coats of sealer glaze and then the TR release. I've basically just given it a good clean. Guys, it's about an hour since I wiped this wax off. I'm going to give it a good blow with this air gun to make sure that I've got no latent dust, particle or anything. Now I vacuumed this room out before I lay up any or spray up any job, but very important that this room stays as clean as possible. Site preparation is almost as important as the actual mold preparation. But in this case, I've set up this room so that I can deal with overspray. There's always going to be overspray, particularly when I'm working with this gun, because it does deliver a lot of material at the same time. But now I'm ready to go, so I've got to get the machine running, got to get it regurgitating for a good 20 minutes or so, make sure I'm getting a good clean resin flow, make sure the catalyst, everything's working. I've serviced the machine, should all be good to go. Got a couple of little things to do, and then I'm into it. It's important with gel coat you use something fresh. This stuff was mixed up on Thursday last week. It's now Thursday the following week, so a good stir up, and just got to make sure it's all ready to go now. The important thing about resins and paints, don't take it for granted that this has been stirred. It's likely to have sat on a shelf for a week or so after it was made. I actually know the date of the batch of this, and I record the dates and I record the batch numbers in my spreadsheet that I've got, my Smartsheet plan, and that gives me a pretty accurate ability to be able to go back and say this batch is faulty. Now when I open these up, I'm always wary. And that's looking pretty good. It's pretty clean, and looks like it's had a good stir. They've taken to putting a plastic sheet over the top of these nowadays, just in case there's an accident. Obviously with hazmat and all that sort of stuff, but that's looking amazing. That's perfect. It's exactly what I was after. Yep, spot on now. I'll keep the lid on until I'm absolutely ready to go. So the first thing I'll do though is I'll lay an old tarpaulin around the front of the mould here, because I'm going to be walking around there, and honestly it doesn't matter how accurate I am with this gun spraying the gel coat onto this job, I'm going to end up with overspray all the way around here. Now I have a particularly clean tarp. It's clean, but it's not sticky, so that's what I'm worried about, is the stickiness, and I will be lifting this tarp up with my boots as I walk around here. I could put some plastic bags over my feet. I'm unlikely to do it for this job, but I would if I was doing a larger job, but this is a pretty big job. The other thing I've done is I've made myself a bit of a walkway around the back here so that I can get over the top and spray down this area here, which is going to be a little bit hard to access from the front because it's around about 2 meters deep. So a little gangplank up the top there gives me good access. Drop chute along the wall here, plastic all the way along, really does mitigate any of that problematic overspray that is pretty common when you're spraying up. Now, I'm not going to be able to deal with it here, but I can live with that. So you can see here, the site's pretty well prepared. Got my screens here. This one here is going to be closed down. I have this fan on at one end for a little bit of airflow within the room, and I've got my extraction and filtration at the other end there. So I'm pretty well set up here to just go ahead and do this job. There's going to be some overspray. That's just part and parcel of gel coating, but I'm going to try and get this done. The other thing I've done too, I've drilled some air release holes in the floors and in the hatches here. I haven't gone and done it anywhere else, only in the floor sections. And a couple of other little things to note. There was a tiny little chip here I discovered. There, I've just smeared some plasticine on there and along the edges, which will aid in the release as well, because any little chip will actually hold the resin and catch it. And that's another thing. I've got a lot of vertical surfaces on this mold. Doesn't have around 3 degrees of release, which is generally what we try to do. That particular surface there has a little bit of release angle, but not a lot. So it's going to be a bit of a bugger to get off the mold, this one. A lot of tight corners and a lot of catches. Very rarely they'll catch on the flat surface. It's more on these corners and on things like this where I've got a lot of things going on down in here. But yeah, for now, I'm pretty much ready to go. I'm going to go and get the machine refluxing, and we'll get started. When I add a new resin, let's say I've swapped from a resin acetone flush to machine, then moved to a gel coat, what I'm actually doing is I'm refluxing. I'm sucking the gel coat up here, but I'm refluxing it into a small container to make sure that any acetone latent in the system ends up in that pot and not in my gel coat. I don't want to thin out my gel coat at all. It's already spray gel coat, so it's quite thin anyway. And by refluxing it in there until I see the clear fluid and the consistency and the viscosity of the gel coat's correct, then I'll put the reflux back in. You might waste a cupful of gel coat, but what you're doing is making sure that acetone's flushed through. You can see it coming out here. You see it's still very clear, and I'm only just at gel coat now. So now is the time I can put that back in to the gel coat and start to reflux it. So I've wasted probably about 300 mils of gel coat, but important, probably 300 mils or 250 of that is acetone. I'll run that really slowly for about 10 minutes and make sure I've got no air in the system. You've got to remember, it's still got to pass its way down that 13 metre long hose, so there's quite a lot of gel coat going to be used up before I even get the spray. But this is my way of ensuring that I'm not going to contaminate my job, contaminate my product, and ultimately I then have to switch the catalyst over. Well, late yesterday afternoon, I gel coated this mold up, and after a sort of a not so successful spray up, I had an O-ring blow on my Graco gun. Now that's actually 99% my fault. It's been about 8 months since that machine's been used, and I serviced it and I thought I'd done it to the level required. However, I didn't change the main feed gel coat O-ring, and yeah, blew, and because I had the shit going everywhere. But you know, I got there in the end. What I did is I had some quite a lot of dripping out of the back end of the gun down onto the actual mold surface, onto the fortunately catalyzed gel coat that was already laid down, and then I was able to then go back and I simply brushed catalyzed gel coat over the top of the initial gel coat. So I've got a good thickness level. It's a bit rough in places, but the great thing about molds and gel coat, unlike paint, the only important part is actually the surface underneath, not the part you're looking at. When you paint something, you're actually looking at the external surface. With these, you're actually looking at the internal surface, which is going to get covered in laminating. So I'm in here this morning nice and early, but I'm in the 30s today, so I'm going to get started pretty quickly on getting some laminate onto this. I'm going to basically knock out 2 layers of 300. I want a little bit of chop matting on this one, purely because it's in a high traffic area of the boat and it's likely to get knocked and banged, and then I'll start putting down some double bias, and then we'll go to foam and then put those subsequent layers on where needed. It's yeah, looking pretty good, and it's ready to go. It's a little bit tacky, it's ready to go. Okay, lamination day. One of the things I love to do, where I've got really tight 90-degree radiuses here, like a vertical and then a 90-degree, and they're pretty tight, I'll always put in a fillet of filler. Now this is simply Q cells and a bit of polyester resin, or even the Sea-Lite bedding compound that I've used in the past. I just simply put that in, and then on the same day I will come along and actually laminate that in. Now that tends to save me a lot of grief later on in areas like that. That's actually a hatch inside or underneath the lounge suite dinette. The problem with that is that every time you bump an area like that, or even this edge here, or along those kick rails there, that's actually a kick rail over the other side there, you will actually chip it if there's any void or any air bubble underneath. So a good way to circumvent that is a tiny amount of filler. It's not a lot, but what it can do is it can save you hours and hours of gel coat repairs and essentially bubbles in the future, or chips that you often see on modules where they haven't been laminated correctly. The next thing I do then is I then stripe it with the first layer of 300 CSM, and by doing that I'm meticulously laminating into the corners and into the voids in here to make sure that I'm actually getting all of the air bubbles out. That's a perfect laminate there, and should result in no subsequent chipping later on down the track. By stripe coating here, I'm simply filling in the panels, and I'm getting the adequate double surface. I have 2 layers of 300 here just to give me that real tie to the gel coat, and simply to make sure those rounded corners on the module are substantial enough to be able to sustain a knock. What I'm actually done is 2 layers of 300 tie layers on all of the intricate edges, all of the parts, so that when I come back to laminate tomorrow, I'm going to end up with a really a much easier job. I basically have to put down 300 tie layer tomorrow first thing on the entire job on all these panels, but I can do them in sheets rather than have to do all the brushwork. All the brushwork's sort of done separately. And you can see around these hatches, quite intricate, quite important you get that laminated right. I'm going to have to give this a very light sand in the morning before I start again, just to take out any little spikes or dags, because I've actually rolled it, although there will always be a couple of little sharp edges that are going to catch. But for now, pretty much all of the difficult, what I'd call the difficult areas, are done. The rest of it's going to be done with the gun and the roller, and large sheets of 300 CSM for the first layer, and then I'm going to head it with 600 double bias, and then another complete layer of 300 before I then foam the important areas, and then do another layer of 600. But yeah, looking pretty good. It's been a big day. I've been bent over all day, so I'm a bit knackered. There's a couple of areas up in here I still need to do. Down in here is quite complicated, but the only way to get in there is to actually kneel there and lean in. Pretty much that's going to be a job first thing in the morning with some plastic. I'll put a piece of plastic down there, kneel there, and I'll be able to get in there, and then ultimately I'll just hit it with sheets of 300 CSM. Now the other advantage of this is now that I can have a flat go at doing flat sheets. I don't have to worry about running out of time and catalyzing resin, and because I'm using external catalyst gun, I can pretty much spray up, do a panel at a time, pretty quick process to do these parts. Now I don't have templates for this particular part, and the reason why is that I'm only producing one of these. This mold will go to the next owner. If I do another one, then it's just as quick to do this. But if I was producing one of these a week, I would certainly be producing templates for each of these pieces of cloth to make sure that I'm getting a good tight fit. Now you can see. Go and have a look. Oh, done 3/4 of it. Oh, it stinks in here. Alright, so I've done all the bottom part and pretty much all of that centre part of the seat. I'll come back in the morning and I'll get onto this part here and around the side. So that was a fair effort because it's pretty complicated laminating down in there. There's a lot of edges and done down here into the mast post. So yeah, looking pretty good. I'm going to go and have a rest because that's been a little bit too big a day. I need a swim and a beer. And that's it. It's looking pretty good. I tend to be a little bit of a seamstress for pretty much most of the morning, where I get all of my cloths cut ready for laminating, and then with this 600 double bias you can physically wrap the mold with the cloth, but then you can actually spray straight over it. I found that easier than wetting the surface and then applying it, and that way I think I use a lot less resin. By the same token, it also is a lot easier to handle, because the only thing with 600 double bias is because it's got a string, it's a stitched fabric and it has a string through it. As soon as you catch one of those with a sticky roller or a sticky brush, it goes everywhere and you lose that reinforcement, or not so much the reinforcement but the stitch that holds it together, and it goes everywhere. You get it all over your hands, all over your clothes, all over your body, and yeah, it's a disaster. So this here I've found, by applying it like this and then applying the gun over the top, I'm able to significantly wet it out and get a really good result. I did the top here last night, over on here as well, and you can see that it's actually almost a perfect laminate, and it's not resin heavy. That's the really thing I love about my gun system, is I can actually apply resin as I need it, rather than slathering it on and then hoping that the cloth's going to soak up the majority of it. So nowhere near as efficient as vacuum infusion, but certainly resin light in the grand scheme of things, and a pretty good fabric to weight ratio, which I reckon is pretty close to, you know, a very high-end laminate. So yeah, by putting in all this cloth first, and I put one layer of 600, a layer of 300, then I've got a good surface to then bond foam to. I wouldn't want to be bonding foam straight to 600. I do like the extra surface area that I get with the 300, and that seems to be the standard that Australian AMSA require with the laminates.